The blackout came without warning. It was a calm autumn evening, and the cul-de-sac sat cloaked in a gentle quiet. Dinner aromas wafted from open kitchen windows, mingling with the crisp smell of fallen leaves. Porch lights glimmered, illuminating neat lawns and cars parked in perfect symmetry along the curb. It was the kind of suburb where every family knew one another's routines, where even the flicker of an unfamiliar car headlight would turn heads. Then the lights went out. Not just the porch lights, but every light, street lamps, houses, even the faint glow from phones and gadgets. It was as if the darkness had swallowed the street whole. The hum of electricity ceased, and the comforting noise of appliances faded into an unnatural silence. I was in my living room when it happened, folding laundry while the television buzzed in the background. When the power cut, I froze mid-fold, socks dangling limply in my hands. The room felt cavernous in the absence of light, the air heavier somehow. From the kitchen, my husband muttered a curse, the clang of his glass hitting the counter breaking the stillness. "Must be the transformer again," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. I moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Darkness met me, thick and impenetrable, broken only by the faint glow of the moon. The street, usually alive with the faint hum of distant traffic, now lay in eerie silence. Something about it felt wrong, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. One by one, doors creaked open. Flashlights bobbed down driveways, cutting faint beams through the darkness. Our neighbors, as unsettled as we were, ventured out to investigate. I hesitated before stepping outside, my slippers crunching on the gravel as I joined the growing cluster of confused faces. "Anyone else's phone out?" asked Janet from 2 doors down, clutching a flashlight like a lifeline. "Mine won't even turn on." The murmurs of agreement sent a ripple of unease through the group. "Something must have knocked out the power lines," Mr. Thompson offered, though his voice wavered. He was the unofficial leader of our little community, always the first to step up with an explanation. "Might have blown out some equipment too." "But how?" Janet pressed, her voice rising. "There's no storm, no wind, nothing." The group fell silent. Eyes darted to the sky, searching for a sign, anything that might explain the sudden, oppressive stillness. But the heavens offered no answers. The stars, usually sharp and vivid in the suburbs, seemed muted, as though the darkness itself had dulled their light. I felt it then, that subtle prickling on the back of my neck, like being watched. Turning my head, I scanned the rows of darkened houses. Their windows gaped like empty eye sockets, blank and lifeless. "Should we call the power company?" someone suggested. "Phones don't work," Janet snapped. A soft gasp came from the edge of the group. It was little Emma from 3 houses down, clutching her father's hand. She pointed toward the vacant house at the end of the street, her small face pale. "Look," she whispered. Everyone turned. The house at the cul-de-sac's end, unoccupied for years, was glowing faintly. A strange, pulsating light flickered in its windows, casting odd shadows on the walls inside. It wasn't the warm, steady light of a bulb, but something else, something cold, almost alive. No one spoke. Finally, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, his bravado thin. "Probably just reflection, moonlight or something." But the light didn't fade. It shimmered, steady and unnerving. And as we stared, a sound broke the silence. It was faint at first, a low hum that seemed to rise from the ground itself. It wasn't mechanical, but something deeper, organic almost. The group stiffened, shifting uneasily as the hum grew louder, reverberating in our chests. The light in the house pulsed once, twice. Then it went dark, leaving the street in silence once more. No one moved. "It's just a power surge," Mr. Thompson said, though even he didn't seem to believe it. "We'll sort this out tomorrow." The group began to disperse, but the unease lingered. As I returned to my house, I glanced back at the vacant home. For a split second, I thought I saw movement, a flicker of a shadow crossing the window. I told myself it was a trick of the light, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, the power hadn't returned. The cul-de-sac, always alive with the sound of sprinklers and lawnmowers, was eerily quiet. Residents emerged onto their porches, exchanging uneasy glances. Cars wouldn't start, and battery-powered radios emitted only static. In the afternoon, Janet called a meeting. We gathered on her lawn, folding chairs and blankets forming a loose circle. Her flashlight lay on the table beside her, though the midday sun offered plenty of light. "We need answers," she said. "Has anyone heard anything? News? Anything at all?" The group shook their heads. "I heard something," said Martin from across the circle, his voice hesitant. "Last night, on my radio, just before it cut out." All eyes turned to him. "It was faint," he continued, his hands twisting nervously in his lap. "Like whispering." I couldn't make out the words, but it didn't sound like static. Whispering. A chill crawled down my spine. "It's probably interference," Mr. Thompson offered. "Sometimes you get overlapping signals when there's a blackout." "But what about the light?" Janet pressed. "The house at the end of the street? Are we just going to pretend that didn't happen?" The group fell silent. "I think we should go check it out," Martin said finally. "You can count me out," Janet snapped. The debate grew heated, voices rising as fear and uncertainty boiled over. I sat quietly, my gaze drifting toward the end of the cul-de-sac. The house loomed there, dark and still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us. That night, the whispers returned. They came through the radio, faint but insistent, accompanied by soft bursts of static. And as I listened, I swore I could hear words forming, half-finished sentences, fragmented and strange. "Waiting. Don't trust them." I turned the radio off, but the whispers didn't stop. The whispers didn't leave me that night. Even with the radio off, I could still hear them faintly, like an itch at the edge of my hearing. I told myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. The house at the end of the cul-de-sac had changed since the blackout. We all felt it. Its presence weighed on the street like an unspoken threat, pressing down on us whenever we so much as glanced its way. By morning, curiosity and dread gnawed at me in equal measure. I couldn't ignore the house anymore. I wasn't alone in my unease. Janet's daughter Emma refused to leave their porch, her wide eyes fixed on the vacant house as if it might leap toward her. Martin admitted he'd seen shadows in its windows, though he quickly tried to laugh it off. And then there was Janet herself, pacing her driveway like a caged animal. "We need to see what's inside," she said, her voice tight. "It's not natural, that house. Not anymore." It wasn't like Janet to sound so rattled. But I felt it too, the pull of the place, the whisper of something unseen, calling from the empty halls. By mid-afternoon, a small group of us had gathered near the house. Janet stood at the forefront, flashlight clutched tightly in one hand, her knuckles pale. Martin hovered near the back, fidgeting with his keys. "Just a quick look," Janet said, though her tone betrayed her fear. "We'll check the front room, maybe the kitchen. That's it." The air grew colder as we approached, the afternoon sun doing little to warm the shade cast by the house's sagging roof. The lawn, untouched for years, was an unruly tangle of dead grass and weeds. The windows, once covered in a thick layer of dust, now seemed unnervingly clear, as if waiting for us to look inside. Janet reached for the doorknob and paused. It wasn't locked. The door swung inward with a low groan, revealing a dim, silent hallway. Dust motes hung suspended in the air, caught in the faint light filtering through the windows. The house smelled of mildew and age, the scent thick and cloying. "Stay close," Janet murmured. We stepped inside. The air was heavier in the house, each breath an effort. The walls, yellowed with age, seemed to close in around us, their shadows stretching unnaturally long. "Nothing here," Martin said quickly, his voice too loud. He pointed toward the empty living room. "See, just an old house." But it wasn't just an old house. I could feel it. The whispers that had plagued me at night seemed to hum faintly in the walls, an undercurrent of sound too faint to pinpoint, but impossible to ignore. As we moved deeper into the hallway, something caught my eye, a faint light emanating from the kitchen. It pulsed faintly, just as it had the night of the blackout. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Janet nodded, her grip on the flashlight tightening. We moved toward the kitchen together, our footsteps muffled against the warped floorboards. The kitchen was empty, yet the light persisted. It radiated from the far wall, a faint, bluish glow that seemed to seep from the cracks in the plaster. "What is that?" Martin asked, his voice trembling. None of us had an answer. The light pulsed once, brighter this time, illuminating the room in an eerie wash of cold blue. Then it faded, leaving us in silence once more. "I think we should leave," Martin said, backing toward the door. But Janet wasn't listening. She moved closer to the wall, her flashlight beam dancing across its surface. Her fingers brushed the plaster, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the wall moved. It wasn't dramatic, just a faint ripple, like the surface of water disturbed by a stone. But it was enough to send us stumbling backward. What was that?" "I don't know," Janet whispered. "But we need to go." We didn't argue. After our visit to the house, the tension in the cul-de-sac reached a boiling point. The whispers grew louder at night, their voices clearer, more insistent. By the third day, neighbors began fortifying their homes. Janet boarded up her windows, while Martin dragged an old chest of drawers against his front door. I wasn't immune to the paranoia. I double-checked every lock in the house, sealing us inside as best I could. The whispers weren't just in the walls anymore. They were outside, circling the cul-de-sac like a predator stalking prey. I saw shadows darting between houses, figures that vanished when I turned to look. "They're watching us," Janet said one afternoon, her voice hollow. "The house, it's watching us through them." "Them?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted an answer. She didn't elaborate, but her meaning was clear. The shadows weren't just tricks of the light. By evening, the air was thick with tension. I sat by the window, staring out at the darkened street. The house at the end of the cul-de-sac loomed there, its windows glowing faintly. And then I saw it. A figure stood in the yard, its silhouette barely discernible against the shadows. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It simply stood there, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. The whispers started again that night, louder than ever. They weren't fragmented anymore, but cohesive, the words clear and cold. "Don't trust them," they said. "They're already inside." I didn't sleep. The cul-de-sac was silent as the clock struck midnight. Not a single light flickered from the tightly sealed homes. The air outside felt heavier than before, a suffocating stillness that pressed against the walls and windows. Inside, I sat in my living room, every curtain drawn and every light extinguished. I thought the darkness might make the whispers stop, as though blending into the void would somehow shield me from whatever was out there. But it didn't help. The whispers were louder now, no longer distant murmurs but full sentences, calm, deliberate, and chilling. "You can't keep us out." My chest tightened as I strained to listen, my ears attuned to every creak and groan of the house. A faint tapping started at the window, a slow, rhythmic sound like a branch brushing against the glass. I told myself it was the wind, but the whispers returned, louder and closer. "Why do you hide? Come see." I couldn't breathe. My eyes darted to the front door, the one place I hadn't reinforced. The lock gleamed faintly in the dim light of the hallway. It was still bolted, still secure. But somehow I knew it wasn't enough. A low hum resonated through the air, the same sound that had accompanied the light in the vacant house. It seemed to emanate from the very walls, vibrating through the floorboards and filling the space with an oppressive energy. I grabbed my flashlight and crept toward the front door, each step slower than the last. My hands trembled as I reached for the knob, holding my breath as I pressed my ear against the cool wood. The hum stopped. For a brief moment, there was nothing but silence. I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe it was over. Maybe the whispers had finally receded. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud or forceful, but soft and deliberate, each tap spaced perfectly apart. My skin prickled, and I stepped back, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. "Who's there?" I managed, though my voice was barely a whisper. No answer. The knock came again, this time louder, more insistent. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the door. The air felt thicker now, as though the room itself was shrinking. The whispers surged, overlapping in a chaotic symphony of voices. "Let us in." "You left it open." "We've already come through." A chill ran down my spine as the words settled in my mind. My breath hitched as I glanced toward the back of the house, toward the one door I hadn't checked that night. The door leading to the basement. It was open. I stared at it, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might drown out the whispers. The faint glow of the flashlight beam illuminated the edges of the doorframe, but beyond that was nothing, just darkness. The whispers grew louder. "Come down. See what waits." I stumbled back, my flashlight trembling in my hands. The hum returned, louder now, vibrating through the house as the darkness beyond the basement door seemed to pulse, alive and waiting. The front door rattled, its lock straining as though something on the other side was testing its strength. My instincts screamed at me to run, to leave the house and never look back. But I couldn't move. The whispers were all around me now, pressing against my ears, my chest, my very thoughts. The flashlight flickered, and in that brief sputter of light, I saw it. A shadow moving within the darkness of the basement, fluid and formless, yet undeniably there. The door to the basement creaked as it opened wider, the darkness spilling into the hallway like a living thing. My flashlight flickered again, and I could have sworn I saw faces in the shadows, their hollow eyes fixed on me. "Come see," the whispers urged. My legs felt rooted to the floor, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The shadows writhed, beckoning, their movements synchronized with the pulsing hum. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it all to disappear. When I opened them, the house was silent. The basement door was shut. The whispers had stopped. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the air was still. The oppressive weight lifted. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, the Cul-De-Sac had returned to an uneasy calm. The other neighbors emerged from their homes, their faces pale and drawn. Janet approached me as I stood on my porch, her voice shaking. "It's gone, isn't it?" she asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure. The air felt lighter, but the memory of the whispers lingered. As I looked down the street toward the vacant house, I noticed something odd. The front door was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. For the first time since the blackout, the house was truly empty. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had come through wasn't gone. It had just found somewhere else to wait. And I knew, deep down, that the last door left open had been mine,